I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Just imagine waking up tomorrow morning with sudden, absolute genius level intelligence.
Oh, man. That's like the ultimate human fantasy.
Totally. Yeah. Just an entirely different, incredibly powerful brain.
It's the limitless pill.
Yes, exactly. You're, I don't know, suddenly solving impossible math equations in your head while you wait for your coffee to brew at 9 a.m.
Or you're like mastering 3 foreign languages on your morning commute.
Right. You basically get to walk around the world feeling like a superhero. It's the ultimate what-if daydream.
It sounds perfect on paper, but let's pivot that scenario just a little bit and look at the shadows. Because the real nightmare of that situation wouldn't actually be the logistics of managing this massive new brain.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, the real tragedy, the terrifying twist to that fantasy, is the sudden, heartbreaking realization that your newfound intelligence finally gives you the capacity to understand something terrible.
Oh.
Yeah. You suddenly realize that the people you thought were your absolute best friends, the people you trusted most in your daily life, were actually using you as a cruel joke for your entire life.
Oof. Yeah, wow, that completely shatters the fantasy.
It really does.
That is just a devastating reality. Well, welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
Glad to be here.
And just a quick heads up for everyone listening, we're going deep into the full story today, so if you haven't read it yet, go do that first, or, stick around if you don't mind the spoilers.
Yeah, and the source material today is just legendary. We're opening the case files on Daniel Keyes' 1959 classic science fiction short story and the 1966 novel expansion, Flowers for Algernon.
Such a classic. And our mission for today's deep dive is to explore the literal architecture of the main character's mind.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. We're going to look at the bioethics of the 1950s and the really profound questions this story raises about human dignity.
We have a massive stack of sources here to go through, too.
We do. From the original text excerpts to some heavy scholarly and historical analyses to help us unpack all of this.
So, to understand why this sudden realization of his friend's cruelty hits our main character, Charlie Gordon, so incredibly hard, we first have to look at how Daniel Keyes structurally builds Charlie's mind for us as readers.
Right, because it's not just standard narration.
No, not at all. Yeah. And to do that, we need to trace how the story itself was built. Because this wasn't a concept Keyes just dashed off over a weekend.
No, it was, what, a 14-year genesis?
Exactly, 14 years.
Yeah.
The thematic core of the story comes directly from Keyes' own life experiences.
His family stuff, right?
Yeah, he felt immense parental pressure as a young man to pursue a medical career. But he desperately wanted to be a writer.
Oh, wow. That's a classic conflict.
It is, but it created this intense early tension for him about how education and intellect can actually estrange you from the people you love. He was terrified that getting smarter meant getting lonelier.
That is so deeply ingrained in the story. But his family dynamics were really just the primer, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. The real catalyst came later.
Right. When he was working in New York in 1957, teaching English to adult learners with intellectual disabilities.
That teaching experience changed everything for him. He had one specific student who came up to him and heartbreakingly asked if it was possible to be put in an ordinary class if he worked really hard and got smart.
Oh, man. That just breaks your heart.
It really does. And concurrently, he had another student whose reading skills rapidly regressed after being temporarily removed from his lessons.
So he's seeing both sides of it.
Exactly. Those two real-world moments, the desperate desire to understand the world and the terrifying fragility of the mind, they crystallized into the character of Charlie Gordon.
So let's introduce Charlie to the listeners. He is a 37-year-old janitor at a bakery.
Right.
He has an IQ of 68, and his defining characteristic is that he desperately, earnestly wants to be smart.
Yes. And knowing the publishing history makes this even more fascinating.
Oh, I love this part.
When Keyes first wrote this, the publisher Galaxy magazine accepted it, but they demanded a happy ending.
Which is wild.
Right. They wanted Charlie to stay a super genius, marry his teacher, and just ride off into the sunset.
Which would have completely undermined the entire thematic weight of the narrative.
Totally. And Keyes famously refused. He pulled the story and took it to the magazine of fantasy and science fiction instead, specifically to preserve the tragedy.
Because the tragedy isn't just a byproduct of the story, the tragedy is the entire point.
Exactly.
And the way he delivers that tragedy is what makes the story a masterpiece. Let's unpack the main structural device here, the progress reports.
Yes, the diaries.
Right. The entire story is told through these first-person diary entries that Charlie is required to write for the scientists who are studying him.
And the sources point out that these reports act as a literal linguistic mirror of Charlie's neural pathways.
It's such a brilliant formal device.
It really is. Keyes uses orthography, meaning spelling, punctuation, and syntax, as a visible mechanical graph of Charlie's cognitive state.
Right, like in the early entries.
Yeah, around March 5th, which Charlie spells M-A-R-T-C-H and number 5. His writing is entirely phonetic.
And has zero punctuation.
Zero, not at all.
The sources use this massive academic term here, under lexicalization.
Oh, yeah.
Which I gather means he doesn't have a big vocabulary, but how does the author actually make that work on the page without it feeling insulting or gimmicky?
It's tricky, right? Think of it like trying to paint a complex, sweeping landscape, but someone only gave you 3 colors of paint. You have to approximate everything.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Charlie doesn't have the abstract vocabulary to describe his clinical environment or his internal state. He relies strictly on concrete auditory approximations.
Right, right.
So when the doctors give him a Rorschach test, He writes it down as Rawshok, spelled Rawshok. His grammar is flat, his thoughts run together, he just strings events next to each other without understanding causality.
But then he undergoes this experimental neurosurgery to artificially boost his intelligence. And as his IQ begins to triple, heading toward a staggering 185, the text undergoes a systematic, breathtaking linguistic correction.
And it happens incrementally, which is the genius of it.
Yeah.
First, the spelling perfectly corrects itself. Then he discovers punctuation. And at first, he actually overuses it mechanically.
Oh, I remember that.
He throws commas and semicolons everywhere simply because he is so excited he learned the rules.
It's almost endearing.
It is. But within weeks, his syntax becomes dense and incredibly complex. He's debating advanced neurochemical theories in his diary. It's a visual IQ curve printed right there on the page.
Okay, let me push back on this a little, though.
Sure, go ahead.
It's an incredible trick watching a time lapse of a mind blooming and then rapidly withering in its own handwriting. But doesn't a device like that run the risk of alienating the reader?
How so?
Like, if he becomes a super genius writing dense academic prose, don't we lose the emotional connection to the character?
We do. And that is exactly the psychological trap Keyes sets for the reader.
Oh, interesting.
It's called the dynamic unreliability of the narrator. In the beginning, Charlie's spelling is terrible, so his reporting of the world is factually unreliable. He thinks his coworkers are his friends when they're actually mocking him.
Right, but we, the audience, know better.
Exactly. But as his grammar becomes flawless, he becomes cognitively reliable. We can completely trust his reporting of scientific facts. However, simultaneously, he becomes emotionally isolated and detached. The prose becomes flawless, but it becomes ice cold. He loses his emotional connection to the world just as he gains his intellectual dominance over it.
That makes perfect sense. And that clinical coldness doesn't come from nowhere. Charlie's perfect grammar at his intellectual peak acts as a magnifying glass that exposes the deep ethical failures of the lead researchers who altered him.
The historical context of the late 1950s is absolutely crucial here.
Tell us about that.
This was a period marked by the systemic institutionalization of the intellectually disabled. People with cognitive differences were highly marginalized, hidden away from society.
Yeah, the sources mention places like the Warren State Home, which operates as this dark looming threat throughout the story.
It's terrifying.
It is the place Charlie will be sent if the experiment fails.
And those state-run facilities were historically notorious for stripping patients of their basic human rights. Residents were often treated as clinical inventory rather than autonomous individuals.
Which is just awful.
It is. And that pervasive cultural lack of protective advocacy is exactly what allows the lead researchers on this project, Dr. Strauss and Professor Niemer, to operate in a total ethical vacuum.
I mean, by modern bioethical standards, what they do to Charlie is horrifying.
Oh, it's a nightmare.
But I have to ask, did they genuinely believe they were doing a good deed for this man? Or was it pure, unchecked arrogance?
It leans heavily into scientific hubris. I mean, they violate almost every tenet of modern clinical ethics, starting with a total inadequacy of informed consent.
Because he couldn't actually consent.
Right. Charlie, with an IQ of 68, possesses no cognitive capacity to understand the systemic risks of experimental neurosurgery, or the high probability of irreversible regression.
How did they even get approval?
They get surrogate consent from his estranged sister, who had abandoned him years prior.
Wow.
Yeah. They strap him to tables, subject him to constant surveillance, and fail to recognize the person who was already there. They openly state they're creating a human being.
Ugh, the arrogance in that phrasing. So he's gaining all this book smarts practically overnight.
Right.
But emotional intelligence takes a lifetime of socialization to build.
Exactly.
It feels like they built a 100-story skyscraper on a foundation meant for a single-family home.
That's a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Intellectually, he's in the clouds, but emotionally, that foundation has to be cracking under the weight of the new structure.
The psychological foundation is definitely crumbling because Charlie gains this adult, genius-level intellect in a matter of weeks. He remains emotionally arrested. He has no framework to process his new maturity.
And that causes intense friction, most notably in his romantic awakening toward his former teacher, Alice Kinnian.
The tragedy of his relationship with Alice is profound.
Yeah, it's really hard to read.
He develops complex adult emotions and intense sexual desires, but he lacks the emotional maturity to navigate them. He fluctuates wildly between supreme intellectual arrogance, looking down on the doctors who created him, and profound emotional insecurity.
Like a kid.
Exactly, feeling like a frightened child whenever he tries to connect with Alice.
And nothing captures that clash between intellect and emotion better than the pivotal scene in the diner.
Oh, man.
This is arguably the most painful moment in the entire text to read. Charlie is at a restaurant, and a 16-year-old mentally disabled dishwasher drops a massive tray of dishes.
Yeah.
The whole crowd starts mocking the kid, whistling and calling him an idiot.
And Charlie catches himself laughing along with the crowd.
He's laughing at this terrified boy, and then the realization hits him. With absolute horror, he understands that he was just like that boy.
It's devastating.
The text describes it so powerfully. Charlie realizes he was peering from a dark room through the keyhole at the dazzling light outside. He finally processes that he used to be the clown for his so-called friends at the bakery.
That diner scene is the exact moment. Charlie understands the illusion of fixing someone. He realizes that his massive intellect hasn't given him any moral superiority at all.
If anything, it made him worse.
Exactly. In fact, his genius almost cost him his empathy. He was willing to laugh at a vulnerable person just to feel like part of the superior crowd.
Wow.
And this clash between pure intellect and emotional reality culminates when Charlie discovers his surgical upgrade is fatally flawed.
Right, the turning point.
But that scientific truth isn't revealed to him by Dr. Strauss or Professor Niemer. It is revealed to him by a laboratory mouse.
Algernon.
Yeah, Algernon.
The white mouse. We have to talk about Algernon. He is Charlie's central narrative foil, and ultimately his biological clock.
Initially, Algernon is just a profound source of frustration.
Because he keeps beating him, right?
Yeah, he is the first non-human subject to successfully undergo the intelligence surgery, and he constantly beats Charlie in maze-solving tests. It humiliates Charlie.
But then it shifts.
Right. As Charlie's intelligence skyrockets past everyone around him, Algernon becomes his only true peer in this bizarre, isolating cognitive atmosphere.
The sources connect this entire journey to Plato's Allegory of the cave, which makes so much sense when you break it down.
It really does.
Preoperative Charlie was chained in the intellectual darkness of the cave. The shadows dancing on the wall were the mocking jokes of his coworkers, and because he didn't know any better, he mistook those shadows for the reality of true friendship.
The surgery represents his sudden, violent release from those chains. He is dragged out of the cave and forced into the blinding, dazzling light of the sun, representing absolute genius.
But that light is incredibly painful.
It's extremely.
It exposes the cruelty of his peers, the hubris of the lead researchers, and the absolute loneliness of being the smartest person in the room.
And the ultimate tragedy of the allegory is that he is forced to return to the dark cage. But now, agonizingly, he remembers what the sun looks like.
He knows exactly what he's losing.
Yes, and the warning signs start with Algernon. The mouse's behavior deteriorates.
What happens to him?
Algernon becomes aggressive, he loses motivation, he violently refuses to run the maze. Charlie observes this and uses his genius to mathematically model his own impending doom.
He calls it the Algernon-Gordon effect, right?
Yes. Charlie proved that artificially increased intelligence deteriorates at a rate directly proportional to the quantity of the increase.
So the higher the peak, the faster the crash back down to his baseline intelligence.
Exactly. It is a relentless biological countdown.
That is so bleak.
And when Algernon finally dies, Charlie buries him in a backyard cheese box. And as Charlie feels his own mind slipping away, he cycles through intense psychological defense mechanisms to cope with the terror.
He starts with intellectualization, right?
Yeah, he treats his own decaying brain as a clinical specimen to avoid the emotional horror of what has happened.
Like pushing it away.
Then comes the anger. He is violently frustrated that he can no longer read the foreign languages he perfectly understood just weeks prior.
And
finally, resignation and isolation. He chooses to exile himself to the Warren State home so the people who loved him won't pity him.
So if you're listening, this raises an incredibly tough question. Think about this as if it were your own life. Is it better to have seen the light and lost it, or to have stayed in the comfortable darkness of the cave and never known what you were missing?
That is the central philosophical tension of the entire novel.
Mm-hmm.
And the question of whether this tragic journey was worth it hasn't just haunted the fictional character of Charlie.
It's spilled over into reality.
Yes, it has sparked fierce debates in the real world over how our society measures human worth.
The cultural legacy of the story is massive. The short story won the Hugo Award for Best Short Fiction in 1959, awarded in 1960.
A huge deal.
And as we mentioned, Keyes expanded it into a novel in 1966, which won the Nebula Award. The novel gave Keyes the room to expand significantly on Charlie's family trauma and his sexuality, which were largely absent from the tighter focus of the short story.
But its legacy within disability studies is incredibly complex and heavily debated.
Yeah, the sources get pretty deep into this.
Scholars have argued for decades about what the story is actually saying. One camp believes the story offers a profound critique of ableism, exposing a capitalist society that only values people based on their utility and productivity.
Basically saying you're only number one if you're producing. But the other camp pushes back hard against that.
Right.
They argue the story relies on a problematic cure narrative, pushing the harmful idea that cognitive disability is inherently a tragedy that must be medically fixed for a person to have value.
It is a vital debate, but looking closely at the text, the sources point out that preoperative Charlie already possessed immense moral integrity.
That's a really good point.
He had a gentle nature, a strong work ethic, and a genuine, beautiful desire to learn. The text actually provides ample evidence that his human dignity was fully intact before any scientific intervention ever took place.
Which is a massive rejection of the scientists' arrogant belief that they somehow created his personhood.
Absolutely.
But because the story challenges so many deep-seated norms about intelligence, bodily autonomy, and who gets to have a fully realized life, it has a long history as a banned book.
This isn't just a relic of the past either.
No.
As recently as 2025, the Escambia County School Board in Florida removed the novel from their libraries. It was part of a mass removal over alleged sexual content.
Now, and we just want to be clear here to everyone listening, we aren't here to judge the board's decision or take any political side on book banning at all.
No, strictly neutral on that.
We are simply reporting on the historical pattern. When literature explores the intersection of cognitive disability, sexual subjectivity, and bodily autonomy, it consistently hits a cultural nerve.
It really does.
The pushback usually centers on society's deep discomfort with who is allowed to have agency in these narratives.
The story forces society to look at its own prejudices, and that is always going to cause friction.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, trying to pull all these threads together.
Go for it.
If personhood is socially constructed, if Charlie's coworkers treat him as a harmless mascot when his IQ is 68, and then treat him as a terrifying alien monster when his IQ hits 185, does the story ultimately argue that society only values people based on their utility? Or does Charlie's final, enduring empathy prove society wrong?
That is the perfect question to frame the entire deep dive. The story aggressively exposes how conditional society's acceptance truly is.
It really does.
People love Charlie when they can feel superior to him, and they hate him when he makes them feel intellectually inadequate. But Charlie's internal journey defies that conditional worth.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate takeaway from Charlie's metamorphosis is that intellect is incredibly fragile. It is temporary.
Yeah.
But empathy and the emotional connections we forge with the people around us, those are the things that actually endure.
Which brings us to the very end of his journey. Charlie finds a way to leave a mark despite losing his genius.
He does.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. When Charlie writes his very last progress report, his mind has completely regressed. He returns entirely to phonetic spelling. There is zero punctuation on the page.
Right back to his baseline.
Right. But his final request isn't about himself. He doesn't ask the lead researchers for a new cure. He doesn't express bitterness.
No. He asks for someone to put flowers on Algernon's grave in the backyard.
So here's the thought to take away. If human memory is so incredibly fragile and intellect is so fleeting, is our humanity actually stored in the physical marks of empathy we leave behind, like a misspelled progress report, or a flower on a grave rather than inside our brains?
It powerfully suggests that empathy is the true, immovable baseline of the human soul.